And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Kirk said, I'm a principal with Bader Martin. We're a full service certified public accounting and consulting firm located here in Seattle. And the firm is an associate member of CAMPS. I am director of our distribution, manufacturing, and forensic practice groups. And as a representative of the CAMPS Events Committee, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our panel of experts today to speak on the very hot topic of cybersecurity. So first off, I have Kip Boyle. Kip is founder and CEO of Cyber Risk Opportunities, whose mission is to help executives thrive as cyber risk managers. His customers have included the US Federal Reserve Bank, Boeing, Visa, Intuit, Mitsubishi, DuPont, and many others. He has been a cybersecurity expert since 1992. His experience includes serving as the director of the Wide Area Network Security for the Air Force F-22 Raptor program and as senior consultant for the Stanford Research Institute. Kip has a graduate certificate in executive leadership and a master's degree in business management. He has authored the book Fire Doesn't Innovate, which discusses the topics we're going to talk about today. And I can testify it's a very good read. Kip resides in the Seattle area with his wife and 6 kids. Our second panelist is Brian Sears. Brian has over 30 years of experience in managing and leading technology and security service solutions-based activities. He is currently the director of technology at Helm Veron, a certified public accounting firm located in Bellevue, Washington. Brian began his career in technology as a cryptologist in special intelligence with the US Navy, laying the foundation for his focus on security issues. Brian then joined a health organization as their senior systems administrator, responsible for managing government Medicare and Medicaid network infrastructures. And for the last 20 years, he has been involved in the accounting industry, helping small to medium-sized firms navigate technology and security concerns. His primary focus is on building secure networks through the balance of technology and addressing the human factors impacting business risk in today's highly connected world. Brian holds a master's in cybersecurity and information assurance, a bachelor's in information technology and security, and is a certified information system security professional, IC2 license 351855. Brian and his wife reside in the Seattle area. Our third panelist is Michael Basilicata. He is the Director of Technology Services at Bader Martin. In fact, his office is right down the hall from mine. Mike's career includes over 25 years in the technology field in manufacturing, retail, consulting, and publishing industries. Mike has completed his executive MBA and specializations in blockchain and strategic thinking. Mike and his wife reside in the Seattle area with their 2 children. So for today's presentation, we're going to be using a question and answer format. If you have any questions during the presentation, please put those in the chat to my attention, and we'll save some time at the end of the presentation for the panelists to respond to your questions. I'd also like to say up front that our panelists have graciously agreed to stay on if by chance we go past our 11:30 timeframe. If there's any unanswered questions, they will stay on to get those answered for you. Okay, so let's get started. Brian, we hear the term cybersecurity. How would you define that term?
Good morning, everybody. You know, if you Google the term like I did, you're going to find page after page, and every definition is going to be a little bit different. It's a real good example of how that term is in a lot of ways fluid. But if you would pack it into a nutshell, it's essentially everything we try to do to mitigate all the risks associated with the technology that we use every day. You know, that includes your intellectual property, any client data, hardware, software. It can go on and on and on.
Very good. Kip, can you give our attendees an idea of the severity of cybercrime? In other words, are there statistics on the number of attacks, number of damages?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's different ways to measure it. I like to kind of roll it all up because I think that really helps look at the kind of the global trend here. So the current estimates are that cyber crime in aggregate is going to cost the world $10.5 trillion annually by 2025. That's an enormous number. I've never seen 1 trillion of anything, so I don't even know what 10.5 trillion of something looks like. But I can tell you that it's a massive number, and if you made an economy or a national economy out of that number, it would be the third largest economy on the planet, behind the United States and China. So I mean, think about that. So $10.5 trillion. In 2015, that number was $3 trillion. And so I think, in your mind, you can probably imagine like one of those, hockey stick graphs, right? Because the stuff's going up by like 15% per year. But it's all very abstract. And really, the other thing I want to say is we have the statistics, but it's really the stories of companies and people who are being victimized and what's happening to them in that process. And I just want to say that for myself, I think it's wrong, and that companies should be attacked like this. And anyway, so that's what I spend my time doing, is helping companies to deal with this, because it's just awful.
Kip, those numbers are just staggering and scary, quite frankly.
Steve, can I jump in for just a second?
Sure, Brian.
So that number tip that Kip put out is, that's what we know of. There's a whole sector of industry that doesn't report, and they don't report because they're afraid of the stigma that comes along with it. So those numbers are substantially higher.
Wow.
Yeah, that is true. The stigma factor is enormous, and it's disserving us as an online community, because people don't realize that folks near to them have been victimized, and so they don't become sensitized to it. They don't realize that they really are a target. That's the downside.
Hey, Mike, in addition to the dollar damages, what other forms of damage could a company incur through a cybersecurity attack?
First and foremost, I just want to say thank you for having me here, and I'm honored to be here with the host attendees and these cybersecurity thought leaders of this panel. Just to tie into where Kip was and Brian moments ago, top of mind, brand reputation, and your reputation is definitely at risk if something does happen. Companies that typically have no plan and or under communicate their breach calls to action probably or most likely will be criticized, which will impact their brand. On the contrary, organizations or companies that plan, it's important to get expert help, take immediate responsibility, and then take better steps to protect their systems in the future. I believe professionally can save their reputation and their brand, and they'll be in a much better position if a breach or attack occurs again. So brand is something that is extremely important, considering the type of media, social media, and where a company stands and how quickly things can circle the internet and the world.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, a lot of people think cybersecurity is just an IT matter. Is that true?
Absolutely not. It's partly why we can't get ahead of this problem. We invest money, we throw tech at this. The problem is we've kind of created this problem, and the tech that's causing the problem is created by us, and then we create more tech to try to counteract the problem. But we never address the actual human factor, the people that are involved in this process. We don't train our users. We don't get the people that have contact with the tech every day aware of the environment that they're working in and the dangers associated with it. And then you add on top of it things like social networking and how that gets data mined and used in phishing attacks. And there's great examples of how that happens out there. RSA was a good example of that. So, you know, we need to start finding a balance and addressing the human factor in cybersecurity. And even then, I don't think this is a battle we can win. We can certainly level the playing field, though.
Very good. Hey, Kip, I personally relate to real life stories. Is there a cybersecurity attack that you've been actually involved in that you could talk to our group about?
Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to share two, and each one of them will be brief. So, I mean, just to tack on what Brian was saying, both of these attacks were the result of it started with phishing, and somebody clicking on a link, you know, that let a bad bunch of folks into their network. Well, one of them was actually an apple grower in Eastern Washington. They suffered a ransomware attack, and it completely seized up their packing line. So they could bring fruit in from the orchard, but then, you know, there wasn't much they could do with it once it got onto the property, because you know, agriculture is as much a manufacturing operation as, you know, as any manufacturing operation, because, you know, they've got computer controlled lines, and they just can't pack a single case of fruit without all their computers running. So unfortunately, they got ransomware. And one of the direct consequences of that, they didn't go out of business. Fortunately, they had a lot of financial damage. But one of the big problems was, as far as their data was concerned, is they had a lot of organic fruit. Now, organic fruit requires documentation to attest to its source and to how it's been handled, so that it can carry that organic label. Well, they lost all of their files and records related to their cultivated organic fruit. And so rather than being able to sell it at a more premium price in different products, they had to just dump it in with the, you know, all the other common fruit. And so that was a pretty big hit for them. And then the second one I wanted to share is a mortgage broker that we helped about this time last year. And what was really awful about this particular case is they got ransomware as well, and they eventually recovered. But as we were going through it, you know, the thing that really struck me is this was about 150 person organization. It had been started by a husband and wife immigrant couple, you know, many years ago, a couple of decades ago, and their family. This is like their family business, and they had no idea what was going on. And I just felt awful for them, because this was their family legacy for their children and their grandchildren, and it was all at risk. And it was feeling extremely tense and difficult for quite a bit of time. And so it was just an awful experience for them to go through. And, you know, people can blame them for not being aware of what's going on. And I think there's some validity to that, right? I mean, we do need to know what's happening, what our risks are. But at the same time, I just kept thinking to myself, you know, like, this isn't right. You know, why should people be attacked like this, you know, at will, with impunity? Why should cyber criminals be able to do this without any consequences at all? And you know, and there is no easy button. I you know, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but there just is no easy button. I have this conversation all the time with people.
I've thought for years that if the scammers put their knowledge to constructive use, you know, the world would be such a better place. I just don't understand why they
Well, that's one of the problems, Steve, is that there's you know, in a lot of the countries where these people operate from, there is a lack of economic opportunity for them, but they are highly trained and very smart. And so, you know, they have to, you know, they're making these choices to feed their families just like we are, you know, but they just have different choices in front of them. And I'm not giving them a free pass for that. That's not an excuse, but it is an explanation to understand, you know, possibly why this is happening.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, a central theme for camps has been innovation, including Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution. This conceptualizes rapid change in technology, industries, society patterns, and processes into the 21st century due to increasing interconnectivity and smart automation. How does that affect cybersecurity risk?
It's a lot to digest, and now that I'm in the accounting or finance side, and having been in manufacturing. So the fourth industrial revolution is, from my understanding, is the triangle, the production, management, and governance. But typical manufacturing is moved at a more of a linear pace. And I guess things, technology, people, and process are now moving at that exponential rate. And sometimes that fourth industrial revolution, I guess, is being used interchangeably with digital transformation. So to answer your question directly, because all of those moving parts and leveraging or harnessing technology, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, biotech, quantum computing, there's more possibilities, more to manage, which probably creates a greater risk surface. And I'll provide some type of context and example. An automobile manufacturer may use 3D printing, not for prototyping, but actually for a tooling or a tool creation, or eventually to make parts. They decide that it's working well, so they start a social media campaign to crowdsource current and future customers. What's the next car we're going to build? And that information flows into a big data pool. Algorithms and AI make some decisions, and then a car is basically produced through 3D printing. All of that, of course, is not stored on premise anymore in a data server room. It's all in the public cloud. It's either over with Amazon or Microsoft. So again, talking about the more possibilities, the more to manage, it creates a larger risk surface. So yes, we're living in exciting times. I like to refer to the 3 C's: cloud, compute, and connect. If you can dream it up, you can somehow patch together a network to make something happen. So yes, more risk, more possibilities, more to manage.
Yeah, can I tack on to that?
Yeah, please. I was going to ask you guys for your thoughts.
Yeah, so when I was working with the apple grower, so this, again, working with somebody in agriculture, I mean, it was kind of surprising to me when I first encountered, just how technology dependent they were. And so when I was talking to the chief financial officer downstream from this awful incident they had, and I asked him, I said, well, what do you want to do about this? Because you clearly don't want it to happen again. What should we be doing here to help you, and so forth. And he kind of just got this look on his face, and he kind of got this faraway stare in his eyes, and he goes, this is, we're just farmers. Like, we're not technology people, right? Like, we just want to stay farmers. We don't want to go all techie on this, right? And I looked at him and I said, I'm sorry, but you are a technology company that happens to know a lot about fruit. That's who you are. And so there's this real identity crisis that's going on, as the world transforms. And that's what I wanted to add to Mike's comment.
Ryan, do you have any comments on how innovation affects cybersecurity?
Yeah, for me, the roles have been a little reversed over the years. If we went back 20 or 30 years, it was us people innovating and pushing technology down the road. And nowadays, it's more the technology's pushing us. It's evolving so quick. We're spending more time trying to keep up than actually creating new tech. It's ahead of us. And this is where the problem gets created, and why we have apple growers who just want to grow apples and don't understand why they need to be a tech company. That tech is what's making them competitive in the market, and being able to keep up and stay safe and secure is important.
It's table stakes. They can't really even do business without it.
Right, exactly.
And it's not just being a tech company, it's being risk aware of the threats to their business, right?
Well, I think you have to build that risk awareness on top of the acknowledgement, that's part of your profile.
Well, and part of that too is getting companies to understand that IT is kind of not this silo thing off to the side. It's actually part of your overall business risk profile. And you need to pack that in with all the other risks you consider when you open a business.
Very true. Hey, Kip, I think part of human nature is that, we think this will never happen to us, right? How should an organization approach cybersecurity?
Well, so there's a lot of different thinking on this, and I want to share with you what I think makes sense right now in the world that we're living in, that we're talking about with 15% compound annual growth rate on cybercrime and the size of all the damages, and the fact that the U.S. government, among other governments, is really impotent right now to do anything about it. And it's not because they're not trying. I do believe they are trying. But this is a massive shift in the world, and they're trying to catch up to this. They're trying to figure out what's going on. Given that the U.S. government does not have the same types of institutions that can protect us from cybercrime the way they can protect us from a bank robber with a gun who goes into a bank branch, I believe right now the way to think about it is how can you make yourself a harder target? Okay, because cyber criminals are automated. They have every technology that Amazon has, that Amazon uses to compete successfully with Walmart, right? So if you think about new retail versus old retail, right? I want you to think about it as new crime versus old crime. And so, it's economical for a cyber criminal to attack anybody, no matter what your size is. It's absolutely economical. So the fact that you're small doesn't matter. The fact that you might be thinking, well, I want to sell to large companies because, per profit transaction is going to be the best. And so, so your business thinking is, aim for the bigger targets, but that's not how cyber criminals are thinking across the board. So you've got to become a tougher target. And how do you do that? Well, I think we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So just, put a bookmark in that. But the challenge that I give to my customers is this. It's not about keeping people from clicking on a phishing link. It's making the fact that somebody clicks on a phishing link irrelevant.
Okay. Mike, Kip has used the term phishing a couple times now, and my understanding is that cyber criminals need some form of information to gain a person's confidence or gain access to a system. Could you define what phishing is and how it allows cyber criminals to get the information they need?
Sure. Just the basic term is when you use phishing, and I'll probably elaborate on some different categories of phishing. I guess they would be categories for lack of a better term, but just phishing in general is a fraudulent email that appears to be from a trusted person or organization, and that's in order to get the recipient of the email to provide something, be it personal information, a password, credit card information, wire transfer information. It is fraudulent. It is purposely being deceptive in trying to obtain that information, and then with that information, that threat actor, bad person, bad guy is going to do something bad to you with it. So the typical, category of deceptive phishing is there's a link or bad code in it, and it's going to do some type of destruction. Several people, several organizations, the security industry talks about spear phishing. And typically it's called spear phishing, and Brian and Kip can correct me if I'm wrong, because they refer to it being more elaborate in the tip of the spear with the intent of getting to a recipient. It's very targeted. So the tip is very targeted at what it's trying to accomplish. And again, it's a fraudulent email in the same sense as a general phishing email. Whaling is usually the bad guy is targeting a high level executive at an organization or a business, again, for bad purposes. And then what everyone has probably received on their mobile device at one point or another is smishing, and it's instead of being an email, it's an SMS text. That's where the smishing comes from. And then phishing is just a general term used, again, for someone trying to gain that information via a phone call. So in general, yes, email appearing to be from a trusted person or company to get the recipient to provide some type of information to do some harm with it. And then those are, typically some type of categories with the credentials that Brian and Kip have. If they want to elaborate some additional categories or add to it, please do.
Gentlemen?
Well, so what I'll throw out there is that, when phishing first, when email first got to be the big thing, we're not sending letters anymore, we're going to email everybody. Phishing was probably more of a random act. And now, regardless of the label that you put on it, we can't look at it as they just picked your name out of some file somewhere and sent it. These are all planned attacks. They have done research. They have collected intel on you. They are targeting you based on the information they have found on the internet. So, we kind of circle back to that human factor, and this is, we keep dumping our lives onto the internet, and all this information is being used against us. So we're kind of at that point where we're being targeted, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But and I'll also add, if I can, we should ask ourselves why are we getting phished, right? What's the, why that? Why aren't people attacking our technology? And I would want to make sure that everybody realizes it's because phishing works.
Yes.
And because it's easier to phish somebody and break into a network than it is to do almost anything else. And so we have to realize that ultimately our defense against all this cybercrime comes down to human beings and how they work together with technology to defend our organizations.
Yeah, we don't hear much anymore about people actually attacking a network or the hardware. It's all the access now is because they attack the human, because our human nature is, hey, we got an email, let's click on this. So we have to change the way we think.
Brian, one of the things that Mike's group has set up in our firm is fake phishing attacks. So I'll get an email, probably 2 to 3 times a week that, looks like a very valid email. But there's a provision for us to click a button that says, hey, I think this might be a phish. And then it goes directly back to Mike. And if it is a fake phishing attack, I get a little, gold star that says, congratulations, you detected a phishing attack. Is that the human nature that we're talking about, is just conditioning, people like me who are not, an information technology savvy person to recognize when these things might be happening?
Absolutely. I think this is where we have to start. And it's not like a one-time thing. We do something very similar here. We do constant refreshers in our all hands meetings. So it's this constant refreshing of information, and it can't go stale. If Mike stopped doing this for 6 months or a year, everybody would just revert back to their old way of doing things. Yeah. So we constantly have to be reminded of the risk, because the risks are always changing.
So every organization that our attendees are from today really need to incorporate some kind of education to their employees on cybersecurity as a starting point.
Absolutely. At least something once a month, whether it be an all hands or whether it be an email, but there should be some sort of communication and a training evolution that just continues as part of your normal business.
Okay. Kip, your book's title is Fire Doesn't Innovate. And one thing I learned is that means that we have very good knowledge of what fire does. In other words, how it starts, what it can consume, and how you can put it out, and essentially the damages it can create. What's your correlation with fire and cybersecurity in your book?
I really appreciate that you, honed in on the title of my book, because that is exactly what I'm trying to bring out in folks' minds. We're used to, as human beings, dealing with what I would call static risks, which is what you described. Fire is a static risk. It doesn't change. It doesn't suddenly know how to burn brick and mortar, right? It doesn't mutate. It doesn't become different. It's really the same thing. And so when it was burning down our cities in the late 1800s, as we were industrializing, we had to figure out how to control this thing. Otherwise, we couldn't scale our cities, without fire. We needed it. So we studied it and we sorted it out, and insurance companies came along and wrote fire policies. And ultimately, insurance companies took a leadership position on how to control fire. And that's why today we live in a world with well-funded fire departments, municipal fire departments, sprinkler systems in our buildings, fire-resistant materials, and that sort of thing. Well, cyber is totally different from fire because it's a dynamic risk. And we've kind of hinted and talked about this already today here in the roundtable. We're never going to get done figuring out cyber, right? It's never going to boil down to a single checklist or a single, handbook or something like that, which is just going to give us, the magic, easy button that we need to get out of it. It just isn't going to happen that way. And the reason is because, there are people behind it, and those people are changing how they attack us all the time. It's kind of a cat and mouse game that we're locked in. And so that's, really what I'm trying to get across to folks, is that you just fundamentally have to change the way you think about cyber and stop trying to manage it as a static risk.
Excellent. Brian, do you have any extra thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, this is a fluid thing. We can't, it's kind of like writing a policy. Well, a lot of places will write a policy or procedure, they throw it in the file cabinet and they never revisit it. Well, your business changes, your goals change. And in the same way, the way we look at cybersecurity changes, because the attacks are always changing. So you have to stay fluid, you have to evolve, and again, retrain constantly.
Wow. Mike, I'm really getting the feeling that all of the things that we're talking about are interrelated. So, cybersecurity seems like such a daunting issue as far as, can we solve it? Will we ever be able to solve it? Will we ever get to a point where it's not a concern?
Absolutely not. I think it just touches upon the point that Kip and Brian both just made about evolving. So yes, people are evolving. Your processes internally and with your customers and your business partners are evolving. I think we all know the technology is evolving with the understanding of not only where technology is in our lives, but in the industry, the manufacturing industry, as now the term is, the Industrial Revolution or 4.0. Everything's so interconnected. We're so reliant on those three things: people, process, and technology. I believe Brian and Kip both mentioned adapting. We need to adapt. We need to be aware. I'm a firm believer in over communicating as well, and that's left, right, up and down, sideways, letting all parties know what you're doing, when you're working with experts, how you're educating your team. That's both, again, business partners and customers, because they're in business with you, in the supply chain with you, to grow their organization. They want to make sure that you're doing the right thing to manage risk in your organization as well. So, yeah, it's evolving. It's not something you can solve, I believe Kip said, with a checklist. And similar to how you would nurture a business operationally, financially, you need to nurture your security program. Brian and Kip will be able to name, what you're looking for in an allocated portfolio, how you define risks. I think someone touched upon policy, and there's also practices. So that framework is not static. So yeah, it's similar to growing and nurturing a business and adapting with business variables that change around you and internally. That's how you should treat your cybersecurity program.
Very good.
I'm going to add one thing, Steve, really quick is,
Yes.
you know, I appreciate having Mike as a counterpart, because we communicate, we talk about these issues. But that's a big problem in all industries, is we kind of want to hide from these things. We don't want to talk with our counterparts. And we need to start communicating and talking to our counterparts and exchanging information that will give us a leg up on some of this.
That's actually a great segue as to that's one of the key reasons that camps exist, is to allow our manufacturing members to, you know, have a chance to talk to other people, you know, in their general industry about these issues. So that's great. Brian, I think one of the best things a presentation like this can hope for is to provide the attendees maybe two to three key takeaways from the presentation that they could do right now. Can you give our attendees a couple items that would be tasks to tackle right away to help this issue?
I think the first thing I'd offer up is, you know, assume that you've been breached. Essentially, it's going to happen at some point. No matter what you do, some way someone's going to get in. And you should also assume that you may have already been breached and you just don't know about it yet. If you approach everything you do from that standpoint, you're already a little ahead of the game. The next part is people, the human factor. You have to start training the people who interact with your tech every day to recognize the risk and how to react when they think there is a risk taking place. And you know, I think those are the two biggest things I'd offer up. I mean, there's a whole list. I could go on and on and on, but I'm sure Kip can offer his chunk of this too.
Okay. Kip, one thing I learned from your book, my assumption was that if there's a security breach, you're going to know about it right away. But your book mentions that scammers can get in, plant a seed into your software that can just sit there for a long period of time. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yeah, happy to do it. And so, yeah, the idea here is that these days, let's take a ransomware attack, for example. Ransomware is prolific right now. And I think manufacturers are particularly, vulnerable to this. And I think it strikes them particularly hard when it happens, because it can shut down their entire, manufacturing line. And that just destroys your ability to serve customers. So, so what's happening is that the cyber attackers are becoming more professional in the way they operate, and they're starting to begin to form specialized groups. And so in the past, you'd have one gang that sort of did everything from breaking into your network to releasing the ransomware to issuing the ransom demand and so forth. But now what we have is we have groups that specialize in breaking into companies, and they do it silently. And then what happens is that once they get into your company, they then sell that access off to another gang, which specializes in preparing the organization to be ransomwared. And so then the second group will come in and silently, and usually over a period of weeks, they will be in your organization. They'll be moving around. They'll be retrieving information. So one thing they'll do is they'll go off and they'll examine your financials, because they want to know whether you have cyber insurance or not. They want to know how much liquidity you have, because that's going to form the basis for their ransom demand. Then they're going to have another group of people are going to go and they're going to start to systematically dismantle your controls, the things that you have in place, like your data backups and your anti-malware systems. And they're going to prepare a software package to be deployed. Typically, they'll do that by using your Microsoft Windows Active Directory or whatever, however you deploy software in your organization. They'll just hijack that and they'll implant this malicious code. Well, then once that happens, they press a button when they're ready, not on your schedule, but on theirs. And then that's when the attack begins. And the attack will typically happen at a time that's awful for you. It'll be on a weekend or on a holiday or in the middle of the night or something like that to really catch you off guard. And then there'll be another specialized crew that will interact with you in terms of the ransom demand and the payment of the ransom. And if you have an insurance company, and if they become involved, then there's another crew that is expert at dealing with insurance negotiators and so forth. So I think it's really important for us to understand that these are not adolescent, bored adolescent people like Hollywood would have us to believe, whether it's, you're thinking about War Games, the 1983 movie, or you're thinking about Mr. Robot, which is the USA Network series that came out pretty recently. And they would have you believe that all this trouble is being caused by bored kids or, mentally ill individuals. And that's not what's going on right now. These folks are working in well-lit spaces. Steve, I can see that you're sitting in your office right now. You've got the false ceiling, you've got the door outside, you've got a photocopier and work group printers, and people are sitting at their desks. And that's exactly how the people attacking us go to work every day in a workspace very similar to yours. And so this is something that we, as the people getting attacked, need to catch up to this, that this is how things really are happening today.
So my job is to help companies and their job is to destroy companies.
Well, they don't want to destroy you. So that's really interesting. They're like the bully who wants your milk money.
No.
The bully wants you to come back every day and give you your milk money, right? They don't actually want to kill you or just stop you. They're more like a tick, right? Or a tapeworm, right? They want to attach themselves to you, keep you alive, but they want to help themselves to your resources. That's what's really going on here.
Scary. Hey, Kip, I've noticed in the chat that a couple people are looking at your book, and one person actually ordered your book. I know you have an offer. I know you have an offer for our attendees. Would you care to share that?
Oh, absolutely. So, when Steve, invited me onto the panel and said, hey, Kip, I read your book. And I thought, well, that's fantastic. I wrote my book to be read by people. I really didn't write it because, I was trying to become a wealthy author or whatever. Thank you very much. So listen, folks, if you would like a copy of my book, I would be happy to give you a free copy. And I'd be happy to give you either a soft cover like Steve held up. You could have a Kindle version or an Audible version, which I did the narration for, which is actually kind of fun. But just send me an email and I'll be glad to just, get you a copy of my book in whatever format you'd like. And really, I would love for you to read it. And I would love for you to tell me what you think about it. I'm thinking about doing a second edition, and I would love to get some feedback about how that second edition could be more useful to folks. So anyway, I put my email address in the chat. So if you'd like to just copy that out and send me a note, I would love to hear from you.
Brian, I think you volunteered that people could get a hold of you as well. Would you like to post your contact information in the chat?
Sure, absolutely. I'll do that.
Kind of skipping around a little bit on my questions. What I'm learning, gentlemen, is that this is also interrelated, that some of my questions are kind of becoming repetitive. I think I'm going to ask them just to make sure that we've covered all of the issues. But Mike, one of my questions was, what role does social engineering play in our risk profiles?
I think to reinforce what both Brian and Kip have already said, or what I heard, is a big one. It's people. So social engineering is about manipulating the people and the people, process, and technology. And once they're manipulated, they're going to give up something that's confidential, and the bad guys are going to do something with it. So again, password, bank information, wire. In the manufacturing industry, it could be trade secrets. special part, a special tool, a special process. So, you know, because it's big, or I believe it's big in the risk profile, and I believe, Steve, you mentioned the tests that we do. We also train. So if people, you know, are making some good decisions or some bad decisions, we need that litmus test or gauge to see what we need to reinforce for training. So because it's big in the risk profile, we may do some tests, but we also want to communicate to the team, you know, where the wins and the misses were. And I think within, you know, training, awareness, communication, that's where, you know, it pays dividends. So social engineering doesn't take such a negative part of that risk profile. One of the guys that I work with on my my team here, he uses the phrase during the technology in-doc onboarding, and also we use it at all hands, and we sometimes email it out to teams and directly to people, that the people at Bader Martin are the first and last line of defense when it comes to security, because they're making the decisions. I think Brian said you can load up your tech stack with filtering software, with MFA, with so much security tech, but ultimately people are going to make, you know, the first and last decision.
Yeah.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah. Brian, one of my questions was, should we all be rethinking our approach to cybersecurity? That is painfully obvious now to me. You've already given a couple of good takeaways for how people should start to address this. Anything else we can add at this point?
You know, we've touched on most everything. You know, most companies, whether you're in the cloud, whether you're still running a mixed environment, have infrastructure in-house, have over the years gotten pretty good at securing their hardware. What they're not doing is they're not securing their people. And you know, people are your number one asset in your business, but they also now represent the number one risk to your business. So we really need to get back to visiting the human factor in all of this.
That's a good perspective. Kip, a lot of our member attendees are from, you know, manufacturing companies.
Right.
And does the manufacturing industry as a whole have a greater, equal, or less risk than other industries to cybersecurity?
Well, when it comes to ransomware in particular, I think they're at slightly greater risk, and we have lots of data, you know, on this. So I'm not just speaking anecdotally, but I'm actually reflecting on the annual reports on this, and the reason is actually pretty clear, which is, if you can take control of the manufacturer's computer systems and actually lock them out of their manufacturing lines and shop floors, and then demand a ransom for the restoration of that control and that access, then criminals are highly confident that they're going to get paid, because the cost incurred by a manufacturer, you know, over this sort of delay is tremendous. The ransom paid is only going to be a fraction of the losses should they choose not to pay a ransom. And believe me, this is all very deliberately thought out by the criminals, right? They totally get this, and they're counting on making it look that way to the senior decision makers at the manufacturers. So, and manufacturers, unfortunately, also are at greater risk, I believe, for this, because just like, you know, the CFO that I spoke to at the Apple grower, you know, my experience with most manufacturers is that they don't think of themselves as technology companies. They think of themselves as manufacturers who happen to have a bunch of computers around. Mm-hmm. And so that's a disadvantage for them and a great advantage for the attacker.
So,
thank you.
Hey, Steve, one thing, you know, I think in everything we're talking about, ransomware is probably the one thing that we could solve. We could pretty much almost eliminate, and we could do that simply by stop paying the ransom. But we don't do that because companies don't prepare for a ransomware attack. They don't have good disaster recovery procedures. They're not structured to support a failure in their manufacturing chain. So it's a planning issue. And if we planned and we were structured to support something like this, then we could say, we're not going to pay you. We just recover from the disaster and move on.
So Brian, in that regard, is information backup one of the key responses or part of that disaster recovery plan that you're talking about?
I think that's a big part of it. We have to not only have our information backed up, we have to have a plan in case we lose, in your case, manufacturing line. What are you going to do? Do you have another location you can shift to? How long would it take you to restore that line if you have good information off site? But that takes an investment, and there's usually a financial investment. And then what you come down to is do I want to make this investment over the next 10 years? And this event never happens. It's a balancing act.
I think a lot of our attendees are driven day to day with just running their business and thinking about all these extraneous issues are the concern.
So I'd like to add a thought to that, if I might. There's actually different ways to think about the business value of money that's spent on to fortify yourself against a ransomware attack. And one way that I encourage people to think about it is, let's look at the case of DHL versus TNT, which is a subsidiary of FedEx in Europe. And you can see this in their public reports, but in 2017, they both got hit by a piece of malicious code called NotPetya. And the details are all there, but the bottom line is that TNT had to shut their doors because their computers were out of control. They couldn't pick up or deliver packages, and they had no idea where any of the packages in their possession were. DHL got hit, but they didn't go out of business. They didn't stop working. And as you look at their financial results downstream from that incident, you can see that DHL's volumes, revenue, and profit went up, and TNT's volumes, revenues, and profits went down. And so the value of being able to stay in business when your competitor cannot is tremendous. Now, you can't predict when something like that's going to happen, but I mean, it obviously created a tangible advantage for DHL in that case. And I think manufacturers should think about that.
Yeah, another good example, if you want to read a good case study, and they were hit by the same malware, was Merrick, the big shipping container. They were shut down for 9 days. And how they approached this is just amazing. The communication, not only with the clients, but with the public. They kept the business going, and then they came out on the back end in great condition. So
yeah, Norsk Hydro is another case study you can read, and that's a case that's particularly noteworthy because Norsk Hydro's reputation is actually stronger now because of the way they demonstrated their resilience. People were very impressed. Here's an aluminum producer that had every single system go offline, and yet they recovered. And it's a fascinating story of how they did that with transparency.
Gentlemen, I have one last question that I'm going to pose to the panel as a group, and then I do want to save some time for attendee questions. But given current world events and unstable geopolitical issues that we're facing, what do you see the future of supply chain and cyber risk moving forward? Kip, why don't you start?
Sure. So supply chain security is a huge issue in general, right? Because we're all facing empty shelves at the grocery store and inflated prices and that sort of thing, right? So just-in-time inventory systems were really not resilient enough to handle COVID, pandemics and quarantines and that sort of thing. But in terms of cyber, I worked at Expeditors International for about 5 years, and we moved freight, right? People wanted to ship something, we moved it. And what I figured out from working there is if you can't move data, you can't move freight. Mm-hmm. When we had systems issues, stuff sat in the yards and didn't get loaded onto boats, didn't get loaded onto airplanes, didn't get loaded onto trucks. And if you think about that, that's actually pretty amazing, right? There's the shipment right there, but I can't move it because I can't see the bill of lading, or I can't, submit a customs clearance form or something like that. And so, and that's just one small example of just how our supply chains have been computerized, and how dependent we are on those computers in order to be able to move goods and even services. So think about managed service providers of IT, and you think about a program called Kaseya, or a manufacturer called Kaseya, which manufactured a piece of software that lets IT service providers remote repair computers. Well, that piece of software was compromised at the source, and so they unwittingly transmitted a piece of malware to all of their customers and all of their customers' customers, and it resulted in a massive attack. That's not the only one; it's just one of the recent ones. And so, just think of it as anywhere you've got computer dependency, we're at risk for this sort of thing, and the attackers know this, and they're actively working on ways to mess with us.
Ryan, your thoughts on the future?
Not good. I say that now. It's we've got a lot of things going on in the world that are impacting our supply chains and getting things out of Asia and other places. I'm more concerned because this is creating a void in the supply chain. When you create a void, that creates a whole opportunity for the people who want to do bad things. And in the past 4 months, some good examples are I have ordered equipment. I have gotten equipment packaged as new that was clearly used. I've gotten equipment packaged in brand new boxes that was damaged. And I have received at least one laptop that was clearly a knockoff.
Really?
So my fear is that, it's not that the laptop's a knockoff, but we don't know what's in that laptop. We don't know how the chip was manufactured. We don't know what that chip is going to give that person access to. So a lot of this product is going to make it into the market, and it's going to become a real problem.
Mike, your thoughts?
To the original question about geopolitical issues, I think, and supply chain and cyber risk, it's difficult considering the global landscape, political landscape, on what and how things will impact your supply chain. They definitely can. So I think it's essential, just as you drive your business forward, impact analysis. So, if you're going to call it an impact analysis, if you're going to call it an opportunity canvas, impact analysis, probably to fully understand if geopolitical issues impact your business, if the supply chain that relates to that geopolitical instability or stability, it's also important to look at cyber. So it's similar, to answer your question, and those situations, be it cyber or geopolitical, are going to have an impact on your supply chain. The pandemic has definitely proven that we didn't see this coming. And I think that if we can learn from history, we'll all be better for it. And I'm the half full guy. I'm the optimist. So I believe that my children are going to have a better place. But cyber and cybersecurity is still going to be there.
Very good, thank you. So we have a question from Gretchen. Kip, looks like you started to address it, but Gretchen says, we've recently been a victim of invoice manipulation, a relatively new within the last 2 years or so type of cybercrime. Kip, could you just talk about what that is?
Yeah, happy to do it. The category that specific type of fraud would fit into is generally known as business email compromise. So really, anytime you can use an email to sort of insert yourself into a transaction, or where you can create a transaction out of thin air, is really what we're talking about here. And unfortunately, we're all quite susceptible to this because we have a long history of moving money on the strength of an email without any kind of authentication at all, right? Just sort of a basic assumption that if I get an email and it kind of looks like it came from somebody that I know has an authority to move money, then I should get busy and I should move that money. And so, criminals are taking advantage of that. And this is where the process part of people process technology can be useful to us, because what I tell my customers is you should not be moving money on the strength of a single terse email that shows up at an odd time of the day with, filled with emotion, right? And maybe it's legit, maybe it's not, but you really need to have a two-person authorization approach to these sorts of things at the least, right? So you need to change your process. Ideally, you don't move money on the strength of an email ever. Instead, what you're doing is you're migrating to a payment platform where you can actually conduct transactions with more authenticity than you can over ordinary email. But that's kind of what I'm seeing right now.
Very good. I have one other question. So a lot of people are worried about their business, obviously, but a lot of people are also worried about personal identity theft. Is there one or two things that a person can do to help protect against that?
I would freeze my credit. It's free now at all the major credit bureaus, and they've actually got it pretty well oiled. So if you want to buy something, you can find out which credit bureau is going to handle the credit check. You can instruct them to respond to the credit check, and then you can refreeze your files. It's another hoop to jump through, but the thing is that's the only way to prevent identity theft. There's no other really preventive measure. All this other stuff is really just monitoring after an identity has been stolen, and that's not really helping you. What you want to do is you want to try to prevent that from happening.
Okay. I do realize it's 11:32. There is at least one open question in the chat that I'm going to post to Brian. So for those of you that can stay on, please do so. For those of you that need to drop off, I want to sincerely thank you for attending this presentation. And also in advance, I'm going to express my appreciation of our panel members for devoting their time today to do this for you. Brian, the question is from Jacob, and he says, I agree that we should be communicating to everyone in our supply chain on how we are protecting ourselves from cyber threats. Do you have any recommendations on how to motivate suppliers or customers to improve their protection?
Yeah, if you have a supplier who doesn't want to meet your security requirements, don't use them. I know that's easy for me to say. I'm not a manufacturer, and I know suppliers can be tough to find. If they're touching your tech, if they're touching your people, they should at least be willing to make modest steps to meet whatever policies and procedures you have in place. Because ultimately, you're not just protecting yourself, you're actually extending that protection to them. You're helping them get to that point too. And as far as your customers go, in the accounting industry, we deal with this every day, because we've got those customers, those clients who they just want to send us an email with all their information. And that email is packed full of, all their PII, and it's in the clear, and we can convince a lot of them that they should send it to us encrypted, that they should use other secure manners. But there's always that core group that just like, I don't want to be bothered. You can train who you can train, you can guide who you can guide, but you're always going to have that handful that are just going to resist what you're trying to do. How you work with that customer is kind of up to you, whether you keep them, whether you don't keep them, but you have to make that part of your risk assessment. All
right. Well, gentlemen, again, thank you so very much for your time and your expertise. Unless there's any final concluding thoughts, we're going to bring this to a close and wish everyone a great day.
One more thing I could offer on that last question, Steve, is contracts. You need to have indemnification language and requirements in your contracts for both your suppliers and your customers. I navigate this all the time for my customers. They're either trying to buy something or sell something, and they're looking for contract terms and conditions to protect them. And so, talk to your contracts manager.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I I miss that. But you know, it works both ways. I deal with this too, and everybody's indemnifying themselves, and basically there's no place for the risk to go.
Good point. Good
Yeah,
point.
it's there's no easy button.
All right,
Sorry.
Stacey, I'm turning it back over to you. We'll conclude our recording. And again, thank everyone for attending, and I hope this was of value.